Good evening. Welcome to Aro Ling Cardiff. We have another Mahasiddha story for you this evening, which is Lu'ipa. And Ngakpa ö-Dzin is going to read this story to us.
Good evening. There's a little something I want to say before the story. The Mahasiddhas could be shocking if that was helpful to the possibility of people's realization. What's shocking, of course, depends on culture, situation, and the personalities involved. A Brahmin culture, for example, eating meat and drinking alcohol would be shocking, but this might actually have little impact these days. Although using human skulls for the eating and drinking receptacles might still raise a few eyebrows. But this is not simply outrageous behavior for its own sake. A disciple or potential disciple would have to be perceptually poised for the shock to be of benefit. So this is by way of a warning for anyone who should come across this video. The following story contains scenes which some listeners may find disturbing. Of course, in reality, Mahasiddhas never gave warnings. They just acted as they saw fit. So this is the story of Lu'ipa, the fish gut eater. Lu'ipa was the second son of a Raja over the land of lions, which bordered on the western frontier of ö-Dzin. As a second son, he had no expectation of succeeding his father as Raja of the land of lions. He turned his mind instead to considerations such as philosophy, the arts and sciences. He became an exponent of all the arts and was keen to absorb as much knowledge of the world as he could. He was a young man who thought in depth about the nature of experience and existence, and of the nature of reality. His studies and internal inquiries eventually led him to understand that although his exploration of the arts and sciences within the palace were rewarding, they were not as rewarding as they could be if he were free to roam the wider world. On reaching this conclusion, he determined to leave the palace, seek a teacher, and become a wandering yogi. As a prince of the land of lions, Lu'ipa had been raised to think of himself as Mi Senge, a human lion, and so as a yogi he intended to roam the snow ranges as a lion amongst yogis. Unfortunately for Lu'ipa, his father died on the cusp of his decision to set off on what he imagined would be a great journey of adventure and discovery. The court astrologers added to his woe by determining that he should succeed his father as Raja rather than his elder brother. His elder brother was naturally indignant, but Lu'ipa came to him with a plan. Do not be angry with me or be resentful, brother, because I like this idea no better than you. I do not wish to take your place as Raja, and I need not take your place if you can help me escape from the palace. His brother was deeply touched by Lu'ipa's lack of self-interest and threw himself into the creation of an elaborate plan to aid Lu'ipa in his escape. Lu'ipa told his immediate family that he intended to remain in his apartments fasting for a week in order to prepare for the ceremonies at which he would be installed as Raja. His family were naturally pleased at his familial piety, knowing that he did not relish the idea of becoming Raja, and so they left him to prepare. That night, with the assistance of his elder brother, Lu'ipa escaped from the palace, dressed in the white rags of a yogi. And by the time his supposed week-long seclusion was over, he was both a sea voyage and a week's hard horseback ride away. Despite searches, Lu'ipa was lost to his family and country, and eventually his elder brother became Raja. He became a good and just ruler because he never forgot the lack of self-interest of Lu'ipa. The court astrologers, seeing what a fine ruler Lu'ipa's brother turned out to be, soon determined that there were sound astrological reasons why he turned out to be the best ruler after all. Lu'ipa sought out Vajrayana teachings from the wandering yogis and yoginis he met, but although they all gave him valuable teachings, none of them turned out to be his Vajra master. Somehow all he ever received was information. There was no sense of transmission, and without the experience of transmission, Lu'ipa could not dedicate himself to becoming a disciple. Although frustrating, this was not too severe a problem to Lu'ipa, as he was young and had many years ahead of him. He was thus confident that, in time, he would find his Vajra master. He was never in want or in need of sustenance, because his courtly manners won him the respect of everyone who encountered him, and thus, although he never sought luxury, his life was extremely easy. He ate of the best of food and wore the finest cloth, because everyone felt moved to present him with the best. It seemed natural, because Lu'ipa was so evidently cultured, well-mannered, and well-spoken. He never sought the best, but the best always came to him, and he was too polite, courteous, and gracious to refuse. He was used to life at court, and even though he had the character and strength to endure a far harsher life than he had experienced in the palace, his life was still far removed from that of most tantric itinerants. Eventually, however, the situation of other tantrikas began to worry Lu'ipa, as he saw how much better his life was than theirs. He started to feel as if he was some kind of sood, a tantric pretender in a world of those to whom comfort was irrelevant. I've left the palace, he thought, but I've brought the palace with me. I thought I'd escaped, but I'm actually still more or less where I always was. I'm just a prince in disguise. He decided that the only way to live the life of a real yogi would be to destroy his reputation as a genteel, refined, socially polished Vajrayanist. Shortly after these ruminations, he came upon a brothel. And rather than wait for darkness, he made something of a show of entering the place. He waited till the street was thronged with people, and there were some who would recognize him. He then entered the brothel with the broadest grin he could muster. This was difficult for him, because even though he believed in the sincerity of his action, the level of discomfort generated by his background and upbringing made him highly anxious. As he walked through the door, he realized that he had no idea at all of what would happen once he'd entered the brothel, and what he would say to those who dwelt there to account for his presence. He had no idea of actually taking advantage of the service the brothel had to offer. He merely wished to ruin his reputation. Sitting inside the brothel, close to the entrance, was a naked whore by the name of Bhargavi. As soon as she saw Lu'ipa, she yelled, "Look who's come to see me! How very, very funny! Look, girls, here's a pretty young virgin who's eager for pussy. I think he needs to be fucked senseless. What do you think? Who wants him first?" Lu'ipa was horrified and started to back out of the brothel. "Too late for that, young lad," Bhargavi laughed. "You need a key to unlock that door. We have to make sure our customers pay up before they leave, so there's no way out of here unless a whore unlocks the door." At that moment, 4 other naked whores appeared, each brandishing a cudgel and grinning. One guarded the front door with a yellowed ivory skull-tipped cudgel. One guarded the rear door with a cudgel surmounted by a verdigreed copper skull. One stood by the eastern side window with a cudgel surmounted by a crystal skull. One stood by the western side window with a cudgel surmounted by a coral skull. There was no way out of the situation. The four whores made no response in ordinary speech. They roared like lions and waved their cudgels as they danced with powerful movements. The whore bearing the yellowed ivory skull-tipped cudgel was slim yet curvaceous, and her movements made her breasts flail. She approached Lu'ipa in a menacing manner, but pulled away and returned to the door. The whore bearing the cudgel surmounted by a verdigreed copper skull was outrageously obese, callipygous, and bathycolpian. Her movements were erratic and unpredictable. She gyrated, moving no closer to Lu'ipa, and finally sneered at him from the rear door. The whore bearing the cudgel surmounted by a crystal skull was thin and sinuous, and her movements were precise and intricate. She leapt at Lu'ipa, but stopped short of colliding with him. She then returned to the eastern window. The whore bearing the cudgel surmounted by a coral skull was muscular and copiously voluptuous. Her movements were wild and capricious. She swayed and swooped, sweeping her arms and fanning her fingers as she circled Lu'ipa. Finally, she laughed at him and glided back to the western window. Bhargavi, with her legs spread wide, sat with regal hauteur. She cradled a cudgel surmounted by a lapis lazuli skull in the crook of her left arm. She stared at him with wide, wrathful eyes and laughed. It seems that the girls aren't interested in you, so it will be down to me. Lu'ipa stood rooted to the spot in a cold sweat, but finally he said, I have no money, so maybe, could you just let me leave? Bhargavi laughed loudly. No one enters this place and leaves without having had a thoroughly good fuck. It will be bad for business. So money or not, a thoroughly good fuck is what you're going to get. But I have no money. I'm a yogi. You're a yogi, are you? She laughed. That seems hard to believe. I can believe you're a prince from the land of lions because you have the torso of a lion and the stride of a lion. But in reality, you're a fake lion, a lion from the taxidermist, a fiction. Yes, sighed Lu'ipa, I admit to that. I was to have been a Raja, but I wanted to be a yogi, and in that I have failed. Yes, I know that, but it's good that you are honest. You know, of course, or maybe you don't, that you had no need to leave your palace to be a yogi. A yogi can be a yogi wherever he lives, but you sought to be an itinerant yogi and it ended up in an itinerant palace. Still, you came here to demolish your palace, and that you have done. Lu'ipa wept with shame. So now, may I leave and learn to live as other yogis live? No, 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 dear boy, there's no need for that. You have sought for a teacher, and you will not find a teacher by leaving here. Excuse me. No, 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 dear boy, there's no need for that. You have sought for a teacher, and you will not find a teacher by leaving here without a game of hide the salami. However, as you have no money, I'd better take my fee in services. We'll start with cunnilingus and see where we go from there. Lu'ipa again was utterly horrified, and Bhargavi had to give him the lowdown on what was expected of him in terms of oral sex. Lu'ipa saw no way out of the situation and obliged Bhargavi as best he could. But rather than the sounds of pleasure, Bhargavi began to sing a song of realization that climaxed in a quintessential explosion of the non-dual state. Lu'ipa had studied and practiced sufficiently to understand that Bhargavi was a siddha, and that he had received the most profound transmission. Lu'ipa then requested Bhargavi to be his teacher. She accepted him as a matter of course. This is, however, not the time for sexual union. This must await a later time, a time when you have experienced the result of the transmission you've received. You will now be hungry. And as you have gained an appetite for the flavor and fragrance of fish, you may take this to eat. You may leave now, and I will find you when you are ready. Lu'ipa thanked Bhargavi for her transmission and teaching, and for the food she had given him. One of the cudgel-bearing whores unlocked the door, and Lu'ipa took his leave. When he examined the contents of his bowl, however, he found some disgusting shreds of rotten fish. Considering it to be a jest on the part of Bhargavi, he threw it into the gutter. But as soon as he did, Bhargavi appeared. I see you're still a daintily refined, delicate gourmet at heart. You won't find realization this way, my prim little prince. At that she vanished, and Lu'ipa immediately remembered Bhargavi's words. There's no way out of here unless a whore unlocks the door. He broke down and wept at his lost opportunity. He returned to the brothel, but no one had heard of Bhargavi. He spent the rest of the night looking everywhere for her, but no one knew of a whore called Bhargavi. He sought her the whole of the next day and the following night without discovering a trace of her. By the morning, he was exhausted and fell asleep on the fishing beach. When he awoke, he was ravenous, not having eaten for almost 3 days. He sat up and looked around him at the fishers cutting the catch. Piles of raw fish guts lay in small heaps around the fisherman, and somehow, knowing what he had to do, he inquired of the fisherman, "Would you allow me to eat the fish guts, as I am starving, and I must eat something?" The fisherman told him to help himself and laughed at him. As he sat there eating fish guts, however, Bhargavi appeared, invisible to the fisherman, and silently motioned Lu'ipa to follow her. She led him to a remote stretch of the dunes far from the fisherman, where she seemed to become conventionally visible. Her mien was entirely different from that of Bhargavi he had encountered at the brothel, and her speech had nothing of the lewd linguistics Bhargavi the whore had employed. "May I ask a question, Reverend Lady?" Bhargavi nodded her assent. "You're entirely different from the whore?" Bhargavi supplied the word. "From the lady I met in the brothel." "Yes," replied Bhargavi, "that is because you are different, but not yet entirely different." "And who were the other 5? "Whores," Bhargavi supplied the word. "The ones who danced and approached me in symbolic ways." At that moment, having reached a spot far from the eyes of the fisherman, Bhargavi removed her clothes and began to teach. They did not exist as such. They were all emanations of my mind. I simply showed you the kilcore of the 5 Sengidongmas. That is why they roared like lions and waved their cudgels as they danced. The whore bearing the yellowed ivory skull-tip cudgel who made her breasts flail was the yellow Sengidongma. The whore bearing the cudgel surmounted by a verdigreed copper skull, whose movements were erratic and unpredictable, was the green Sengidongma. The whore bearing the cudgel surmounted by a crystal skull, who was precise and intricate, was the white Sengidongma. The whore bearing the cudgel surmounted by a coral skull, whose movements were wild and capricious, was the red Sengidongma. I manifested these Sengidongmas as the blue Sengidongma of space, bearing a cudgel surmounted by a lapis lazuli skull. Lu'ipa understood Bhargavi's teaching and, experiencing it as empowerment, asked, "Please give me the teachings in order that I may comprehend the human body." The view of the human body changes according to the vehicle, Lu'ipa. In terms of sutra, a view is cultivated in which the body is seen as a morass of defilements. The body is seen as a potentially festering mass of disease. One considers the waste products of the body and develops revulsion for one's gross physical form. One trains according to the path of renunciation in terms of freeing oneself from attachment with regard to one's self-orientation. This has been your view until now, and this is what caused you such great shock in what you took to be a brothel. Lu'ipa was startled by Bhargavi's teaching and, experiencing it as oral transmission, asked, "Please give me teachings in order that I may realize the wisdom manifested by the human body." In the outer tantras, although human bodies are not regarded as a pure phenomenon, they are regarded with respect as the basis of the Vajra body of the Tsar Lung system. From the point of view of outer tantra, therefore, disparaging the body is seen as a breakage of vows. In the inner tantras, we pass beyond the pure-impure dichotomy, and no need is seen for any form of purification with regard to the body. Lu'ipa was magnetized by Bhargavi's teaching and, experiencing it as symbolic transmission, asked, "Please give me teachings in order that I may understand the primordial nature as it is displayed by the human body." According to Dzogchen, the view is of the ultimate point, and therefore the body is identical to the body of a Buddha. The physical body itself is regarded as the self-perfected dimension. When one views one's partner's body, one views the actual body of a Buddha. Lu'ipa was ecstatically disorientated by Bhargavi's teaching and, experiencing it as direct transmission, asked, "Please give me the conclusion of your teaching in order that I may integrate what I have received into each moment." To gaze upon the self-perfected kill cause of the body of one's partner, Chak-ten, is in itself a profound cause of liberation if you authentically enter that view with co-emergent awareness and devotion. It is extremely important to be in awe of the body of one's partner, because if this enthralled appreciation is lacking, the practice will become degraded. If you engage in the outer form of kajor or jagjor, these are sexual union and union with the tongue, without pure view, one merely imitates a practice and descends into nihilistic depravity. On the conclusion of Bhargavi's teaching, they entered into kajor, and Lu'ipa attained non-dual realization. From that time on, he lived on the offal thrown out by the fishermen and was known as Mahasiddha Lu'ipa, the eater of fish guts.
Thank you very much. So it wasn't too shocking.
It wasn't too shocking.
It's a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah. Fortunately. Only when necessary, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought it was going to be Baruni again.
Ah, right.